Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a pretty big question, really. It spans history, philosophy.
Right. Astrology and determinism.
Exactly, that relationship. The belief that everything's kind of inevitable, causally speaking.
And did ancient societies, who often, seem to lean towards that deterministic view, did they develop astrology because of that, to understand it?
That's the core question we're digging into. We've gathered quite a range of sources, academic stuff, history, philosophy.
Looking at ancient worldviews, those big debates, fate, free will.
And how different cultures tackled it all. So our mission here is to, pull out the key insights for you, give you a solid understanding without, getting bogged down.
Make it engaging.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, the first thing that jumps out really is how the ancients saw the planets and stars.
Not just lights in the sky.
No, not at all. They were seen as like active forces, things that directly influence what happened down here on Earth.
That basic perspective, common across so many early cultures, it really set the stage, didn't it, for connecting the heavens to, human destiny.
Absolutely. And that's the framework where these early astrological systems popped up.
Like Hellenistic astrology, that was, 3rd century BCE to around the 7th CE?
Right. And it didn't just appear in a vacuum. It meshed directly with Stoic ideas.
Hi, Marine.
Exactly. That concept of universal fate, an all-encompassing destiny.
So you take that philosophy and you mix it with the older Babylonian practice of reading omens in the sky.
Celestial omens.
And suddenly you've got a system where planetary movements aren't just signs, they're actually dictating things.
That's how it looked, yeah. Like the cosmos had a script and the planets were just playing their parts.
It's quite a thought.
It is. And the Stoics, they believed the whole cosmos ran on this rational, predetermined order. They called it the logos.
Okay.
So for them, astrology wasn't just interesting. It was like essential, a tool to figure out that divine will, to read the cosmic blueprint.
And we see something similar over in India, right, with Vedic astrology, Jyotish.
Very similar in principle. The Navagras, the 9 planets, they were seen as, karmic deciders.
Karmic deciders, wow.
Yeah, their positions at your birth basically mapped out your soul's journey, across lifetimes even.
So whether you're in the Mediterranean or India back then, there's this shared idea, teleological determinism.
Right, the idea that patterns in the sky aren't random. They reflect some kind of preordained cosmic plan.
We even have proof, like those Babylonian tablets, Enuma, Anu, and Enlil, 2nd millennium BCE.
Linking lunar eclipses directly to what happens to the king.
Talk about pressure from above.
Seriously. And then you have Hellenistic horoscopes mapping out whole lives using these planetary chronocrators.
Time Lords. Sounds very sci-fi.
Kind of. But they were planetary periods thought to govern different life stages. It all pointed to a universe where the stars' positions weren't just hints. They were seen as causally powerful.
But, and this is key, right? These early systems mostly assumed a closed causal loop.
Pretty much, yeah. The stars are like this, so this outcome must happen.
Which, down the line, obviously bumps up against ideas of free will.
Exactly. That's where the criticism starts. If it's all written, where's our choice?
Right. And that connects to what one source mentioned about Mesopotamia, the belief in divine control over fate being a huge factor.
Gods like Enlil holding the actual tablets of destiny.
So maybe astrology didn't start as a philosophical exercise in determinism.
But more as a religious thing,
Yeah.
Trying to read the gods' minds, basically.
That seems plausible, and that makes the whole picture more nuanced, especially when we look east versus west.
Definitely. If you look at Eastern astrology, especially Hinduism and Buddhism, you hit this, you could call it the karmic paradox.
Okay, what's that?
In Hindu astrology, your birth chart maps out your prarabdha karma.
The destined stuff, based on past lives.
Right. Those experiences set in motion before, symbolized by the planets when you were born. It's like a starting point, a karmic inheritance.
Okay, so that's the setup, but is the whole play already written?
Not entirely. That's where Kriyamana karma comes in, your current actions.
Free will enters the chat.
Kind of, yeah. The Bhagavad Gita talks a lot about the power of your will, your choices now, following your dharma, your ethical path.
So the chart shows tendencies from the past.
Exactly. Probabilities.
Yeah.
But your actions now can shape what actually happens next. You're navigating, maybe even reshaping the future path.
So it's less ironclad fate and more strong suggestions you can work with.
That's a good way to put it. And Vedic astrologers, think of someone like V.V. Raman. They argued charts show probabilities, not certainties.
Right.
And they even prescribe upayas, remedies, gemstones, mantras, things to sort of harmonize your energy with the planets.
To mitigate the bad stuff or boost the good.
Exactly. It's like, well, soft determinism is a term you could use. The influences are there, but you've got some agency in how you deal with them.
And Buddhism has similar ideas. Mindfulness to break patterns.
Uh-huh. A similar thread, seeing ways to work within or even transcend those karmic patterns.
Which really contrasts with how things often looked in the West, particularly earlier on.
It really does. Medieval Europe, you had figures like William Lilly. The tendency there was much more towards hard determinism.
Like the chart was the final word, God's plan laid bare.
Pretty much, yeah. But then came the Renaissance. Humanism. Thinkers like Marsilio Ficino.
Ah, the famous quote.
The stars incline but do not compel. That was a big shift, a real turning point for Western astrology.
It sounds like putting the human back into the equation alongside the stars.
Definitely. And modern Western astrology really carries that forward. You get psychological astrology influenced by Jung.
Planetary archetypes as inner drives.
Exactly. Things in your subconscious you can become aware of, work with, integrate.
Makes sense.
And then there's elective astrology, using transits to pick good times for things.
Right. Timing your actions based on the cosmic weather forecast.
Like a clear mix, isn't it? Cosmic timing, but human initiative making the final call.
So you still choose to act, even if you choose when based on the stars.
Precisely. Now, we also have to mention the critics, of course.
Karl Popper. Pseudoscience.
That was his take, yeah. Though some modern astrologers push back, maybe drawing parallels to quantum physics, arguing that, like quantum mechanics, astrology deals in probabilities, tendencies, not rigid, absolute predictions.
Interesting analogy, which brings us nicely to how these different views play out across cultures, the variations.
Yeah, let's look at that. In Asia, say China and India, you still see strong deterministic threads, but with their own unique spin.
China had the mandate of heaven, right? Linking the emperor's rule to signs in the sky.
Absolutely. Comets, conjunctions, these weren't just astronomical events. They could signal divine approval or disapproval of the dynasty. Huge political weight.
A direct line from the cosmos to power on Earth.
You got it. And in India, the practice of muhurta, choosing the best astrological timing for events, weddings, starting businesses.
That implies there are preset cosmic rhythms you should sync up with for success.
Exactly. But interestingly, in both traditions, you also find rituals aimed at karma rectification.
Trying to fix or improve your fate.
Yeah, efforts to soften negative influences. So again, even within systems that seem quite deterministic, there's this sense that destiny isn't maybe totally unchangeable.
You can interact with it.
Right.
Yep.
There's that ancient Vedic text, the Brihad Purusharara Shastra, that says something like, planets indicate, but the wise act.
Ah, so understanding is key, but action still matters. It's about smart alignment, not passive acceptance.
Beautifully put. And then you contrast that with the West, especially post-Enlightenment.
The rise of individualism,
Yeah.
personal agency taking center stage.
Exactly. That really clashed with the older, more fatalistic astrological views. Modern astrologers like Stephen Forrest, he talks about the birth chart being like the lesson plan, not the destiny.
I like that. Like, here's the curriculum, but you still have to take the course.
Right. He uses a genetics analogy, too.
Yeah.
You might have a predisposition, but your lifestyle choices affect how it plays out.
A potentialist approach.
Very much so. It echoes some process philosophy ideas, too, like Alfred North Whitehead's stuff about reality being this constant dance between necessity and creativity.
So the stars provide the structure, the necessity perhaps, but we provide the creative response.
That's one way to frame it, yeah. It acknowledges both factors.
Okay, but we can't ignore the pushback from science and ethics, can we?
No, definitely not. The whole determinism dilemma.
Right. You've got neuroscience, like Libet's experiments.
Suggesting our brain starts acting before we consciously decide to, that throws a wrench in simple ideas of free will.
Definitely makes you think.
And then there's quantum physics, indeterminacy at the subatomic level. Does that mean the universe isn't strictly causal after all?
Big questions. And the ethical one.
Right.
If everything's determined by stars or anything else.
What happens to moral responsibility? How can you praise or blame someone if they didn't truly choose?
It pulls the rug out from under our justice systems, our ideas of merit.
It really does. Now, astrology's answer, or at least one common response, is to talk about different levels. Multi-level causation.
Meaning?
Well, maybe the big planetary cycles show a kind of macro-determinism, large-scale patterns. But on the micro level, the human level.
Interpretation, choice, response. There's room for indeterminacy.
That's the idea. Remember Dennis L. Will's line, The stars propose, humans dispose.
Captures that tension nicely. Broad patterns, but individual responses.
Precisely. So maybe it's helpful to think of astrology on a kind of spectrum.
A spectrum of influence or
Which
determinism?
Yeah. At one end, maybe Hellenistic astrology, often quite high on determinism, lower on agency, accepting fate.
Okay.
Then maybe Vedic astrology, more moderate, karma, yes, but also remedies, upayas, agency to mitigate.
Right, the soft determinism we talked about.
Then maybe psychological astrology, lower determinism, focus on inner archetypes, conscious growth.
Integrating the energies.
And elective astrology is kind of variable, isn't it? It's all about using timing strategically, blending cosmic readiness with human intent.
So you could have, say, a traditional Hindu astrologer prescribing a puja, a ritual.
To appease Saturn, maybe? While a humanistic Western astrologer sees a tough Saturn transit as like an invitation for deep personal restructuring.
Same stars, very different approaches to dealing with them.
Exactly. Now, let's loop back to the very beginning, those Mesopotamian roots. It seems really important to stress that it probably started religiously, not philosophically.
Right. It wasn't like they sat down, decided the universe was deterministic, and then invented astrology to figure it out.
Doesn't seem like it. The belief in gods controlling fate seems to have come first. Astrology was the toolkit for trying to understand the divine will, reading the messages in the sky.
Divine determinism, essentially. Think 3rd millennium BCE Mesopotamia, gods holding the tablets of destiny.
Exactly. It was less about abstract causal laws and more about what are the gods planning for us.
Which is different from, say, later Hellenistic Stoicism, where fate was more integrated into a philosophical physics, right? Although even then, not everyone agreed. Plotinus pushed back.
Right. The key is that the initial impulse in Mesopotamia looks much more theological, more about divine power shaping destiny.
Which sets the stage for looking briefly at how different ancient cultures viewed fate and agency. It wasn't all the same, was it?
Not at all. Sumerians, divine predetermination, Babylonians, gods like Nabu writing down fates.
Greece, you had the Moirai, the fates spinning everyone's destiny, but then you also have myths like Oedipus wrestling with fate versus choice.
Exactly. Egypt had, say, inescapable fate tied to the gods. The Stoics, as we said, had their divine plan, but allowed for some wiggle room, co-fatedness.
Whereas the Epicureans were like, nope, no divine fate, it's about rational choices.
Right. And the Romans had their parse, similar to the Greek fates.
So the common element is the strong sense of destiny or fate being real.
But the amount of room they saw for human action within that fate varied quite a bit.
It shows how this tension has always been there.
Absolutely. And that interplay, that tension between determinism and astrology, it just keeps evolving through history.
Hellenistic links to Stoicism, then challenges from people like Cicero or St. Augustine worried about free will.
Then a renewed interest in the Renaissance, and now the modern shift, with many astrologers really emphasizing potential choice, moving away from strict determinism.
It's like astrology itself mirrors our changing ideas about how much is fixed and how much we can shape.
You could almost see it as a particular flavor of determinism, as one source put it, linked to starting conditions, cosmic laws maybe.
But ultimately, offering guidance within whatever fate throws at you, allowing smarter choices.
That's certainly how many practitioners frame it today.
So wrapping this all up, it's clear the relationship between astrology and determinism isn't simple, it's complex, and it's changed a lot.
Definitely. Ancient astrology often did align neatly with deterministic views, divine will, philosophical fate, but it wasn't universal, and it certainly wasn't static.
And that point about the origins feels crucial. It likely started as a way to read divine signs, not as a philosophical deduction about a predetermined universe.
That religious context, especially in Mesopotamia, seems fundamental to its beginnings. Less about causal laws, more about divine communication.
This has been, well, a really fascinating deep dive. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How our own ideas about cause and effect, about free will, influenced by science, philosophy today, how they shape the way we look back at these ancient systems.
Right. What is the enduring appeal of astrology? Is it that deterministic side, the feeling of order it might offer?
Or is it more about the framework it provides, a way to understand ourselves, our place in the cosmos, maybe, even if it's not about rigid predestination?
That's the question to ponder, isn't it? Where does its power lie for people now and back then? A great thought to leave things on.